Welcome back to Wednesday Night Live, coming to you from beautiful Pocatello, the gateway to the great Northwest. Well, we've been under the weather for some time now, and those of you who don't live here locally, hopefully you're well. But here in Pocatello, there's something going around that has really adversely affected quite a bit of the community. My wife and I have been down with it basically for a month, and we're not quite out of the woods. But I finished my penicillin regimen today. And I'm going to try to keep my coughing, choking, and gagging to a minimum so that you won't have too much to worry about. Going to try to get caught up to date on a number of things. Before we do, though, as I do every week at this time, I'd like to remind you once again about Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center. 208-478-HOPE, Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center. And I'll read from their mission statement. I've almost got it memorized after just 3 years. Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center is a Christ-centered nonprofit ministry offering life-affirming alternatives to abortion and compassionate care to those who face pregnancy and abortion-related issues. It's that simple. In other words, it's the absolute opposite of the murder mill called Planned Parenthood. Compassion and Hope is a local entity. I believe they do have other affiliates, but not in this area. They are very small. They work on a shoestring. They need all the help they can get in order to be compassionate and to give hope to an expectant mother, a new mother, and to the child that she would bear. Oftentimes, women who go to Compassion and Hope for help are going there for counseling as well as help in deciding when to have the baby, and all of those things go along with it. Oftentimes, they're young women who are, as we used to say back in the day, in trouble, and they need compassion and hope. You can help. You can help by calling 478-HOPE. Remember, the whole state of Idaho is 208. And see if you can make a donation or in some other way. It doesn't have to be financial, although since they are on a very small, short shoestring, it would help. But it can be a number of items. Give them a call and see what you can do to help give compassion and hope to a young mother and to a new baby. God will bless you. Your heart's going to feel very good about it. There's a lot happening right now. You know, it's the silly season. We're in the elections, and everything is just up in the air. It's a real mess. The Donald is driving everybody nuts, in the establishment especially. And isn't it interesting that Donald Trump, who is basically a huckster salesman, but he has defied all wisdom, if you will, political wisdom, by getting as far as he has, and he's done so by picking at those little sores that Mr. and Mrs. America have been building for years. You know, I heard a very interesting comment. A lady called into Rush Limbaugh, and I was hearing as I was going someplace, and she made a very, very cogent point. She said, you know, the establishment continues to betray us year after year after year. And of course, she's referring to the Republicans, especially here, because she is a Republican, according to her. She said, you know, the Republican establishment told us they needed the Congress. We went out and gave them the Congress. They said they would change the whole thing in Washington, and they would get rid of Obamacare, and they'd get back to sanity. We gave them the Congress, the House of Representatives, nothing happened. They said they had to have the Senate, that the House wasn't enough. So we went out and gave them the Senate, and it's still business as usual at Capitol Hill. They're still taking care of Obama, hauling his water for him, and making their same lame excuses that they've always made. And so Donald Trump comes basically out of nowhere as a businessman, and he appeals to that part of America that is just sick and tired of the whole lying mess, whether we're talking about the media or the establishment Republicans or the left-wing commie pinko bedwetting socialist Democrats. Doesn't matter. Everybody is fed up. Even Democrats are fed up, and Trump is attracting Democrats to his cause. And so he's something of a phenomenon that has the establishment, frankly, scratching their head. I was listening as I was coming in today, and a beautiful day here, by the way. We're up in the lower 60s, hence the short sleeves. Looks like spring has sprung. But while I was listening and enjoying a lovely day, Hannity was talking to Reince Priebus. No, I don't know what kind of a name that is, but Reince Priebus is the chairman of the Republican National Committee, or whatever his proper title is. And Hannity was talking to him about this very thing, the establishment, and how people feel like they've been betrayed. They're sick and tired of being betrayed, and that's why they go to Donald Trump. And Priebus, they just don't get it. They can't quite get the picture. They are so held in thrall by their power and by their idea of the way things should be, in other words, keeping their cronies in power. He just can't get the big picture on why the American people are angry. And once again, they were talking about the possibility of a brokered convention. Now, I don't know about you, but I would not be happy with a brokered convention. Let me make a very strong point here, and I do hope that I can influence you in this way. I've heard a number of people who report to be Republicans, who report to be conservatives, who have said, if Trump is the last man standing, I simply won't vote. Well, that's the same thing as voting for the Democrats. Doesn't matter if it's Hillary or Sanders. Not voting for anybody is the same as voting for the Democrat establishment. And when I hear people who are pretty high up in the party saying, well, I'll just not vote, I get discouraged, and yet I understand. It's the establishment. Once again, they're not getting their own way, and they're like a bunch of crying kindergartners. They're going to take their ball and go home and go wham, wham, wham over into the corner and hide out because they can't have their way. They don't want Trump. I don't want Trump. But if he's the last man standing on the Republican side, I will have to hold my nose and vote for him. Heaven knows we held our noses with McCain. Many of us held our noses with Romney. And neither one of those guys were anything but establishment, as we've seen by Romney's local or recent antics. There's a good reason why he wasn't elected. But if Trump is the last man standing, and I've told you before, my man is Cruz. I believe that Cruz is the guy that we as conservatives have been praying for the last 100 years. We've been asking our Lord to give us a man or a woman who is a genuine constitutionalist, who honestly believes that the Constitution is the bedrock of our republic, that it says what it means, and that we need to be following it. Cruz is the only one who has had the guts to time and again stand up against the Democrats and the establishment Republicans. The O'Connells, or McConnell, or whatever his name is, the leader of the Senate. And Ryan. Ryan's just another Boehner, just a younger version of Boehner. Cruz has been the only one who's had the guts to stand up to them and be truly constitutionally conservative American Republican patriot, in my opinion. So that's why I select him. But that said, if my guy doesn't get it, and they're going to engineer, the Senate hates him. They hate him because he has been absolutely staunch. He has said, this is where I stand and I'm not moving, and that's exactly what he's done. He's had the guts to call out the Senate leadership and tell the world on television, these guys are lying to you, they're wrong. And he's the only one that I've seen I've been voting since 1964, and he's the only one I've seen in that whole time that had the guts to stand up and say that, which is one reason why they hate him, and they're going to do everything they can to get rid of him. So now they have to get rid of Trump, and all Trump is saying basically is what Mr. and Mrs. America are saying. We're sick of it. Now, has he given us anything that sounds like real platform or anything? No. Come on. He reminds me of one summer when I was a boy. I worked in a carnival, and I worked in one of those booths where you see the milk bottles, the metal milk bottles are in a pyramid shape. And I forget what I was being paid. I think it was $1 an hour or something, which back in the day was pretty good for a summer job. I didn't last too long. I was too honest for my own good. I learned, in fact, the barker taught me that there were 2 bottles that were always supposed to be on the bottom, and they were about a third filled with lead. So it was almost virtually impossible to knock them over. I mean, you really had to get a lucky shot. And I had to be sure that when I picked them up, when the bottles were knocked down, I had to make sure that if they were all knocked down, there was a little hole on the bottom that I could look to see if it was filled in with lead. And if it was filled in, that went on the bottom, and then everything stacked up on that. I didn't do too well because I felt it was dishonest, which it was. But then it was a carnival. People expected dishonesty, Hey, Rube. But that's what this whole thing reminds me of today with Trump. He's the guy that teaches the kids how to put the lead-filled things on the bottom. And it's all about the deal, man. We can negotiate. You knocked 3 of the top ones down. Gee, put in another quarter. We'll help you out. So, do I want Trump? No, I don't. If he's the last dog standing, will I vote for him? Absolutely. I'll hold my nose, might even close my eyes, but I'll vote for him. And I hope you will too. It looks like it could get down to that. Cruz has a pretty good chance of picking things up in Utah. Mike Lee has endorsed him, and I believe the governor of Utah, I believe, has endorsed him. That's Cruz. And it's a little difficult to tell about Arizona because Arizona is a winner-take-all thing, but the last statistics I saw was Trump was ahead by, I think it was 31% to Cruz's 19% to Kasich's 10%. And let's face it, folks, you know that Kasich is the ringer for the establishment. He has no statistical possibility of being elected, but he's going to stay in there because the establishment wants him in there so that if they have a brokered convention, they can broker him into being the presidential standard bearer. That's the only reason he's in there. Kasich does not appeal to most of us out here in the West. He does not have the Western style, except for Governor Otter. Otter loves him. But then Otter's, I have to give him credit for being a shrewd politician. If he went for Cruz and Cruz had lost this state, then Otter has egg on his face. If he went for Trump, nobody likes Trump in this state anyway. Well, there are some, but not enough to make it work. Going for Kasich was actually pretty safe for him, and it's one of the good old boys, the establishment. So he played it. You got to hand it to him. It was pretty cagey. Well, now there's a lot going on besides that in politically. I don't know if you saw this article in the Idaho State Journal. Boy, that paper it continues to confound me and just baffle me. I don't know the new owners. I think there's some new owners a couple of years ago. I don't know where they're coming from. I don't know if they're leftist or they're just stupid. I really don't know. But the paper seems to be drifting further and further left. Occasionally it will run somebody who writes from the right or at least from the center. But their editorial opinions almost always look like Mike O'Donnell specials. They're all liberal, progressive junk. And of course, one of their favorite people is Kelly Packer, the legislative representative from 28B, I think it is. By the way, 28A, Ken Andrus, Ken did not file for re-election, which didn't totally surprise me. I had hoped I would have a phone call from him letting me know, but it didn't completely surprise me. But he's not going to run again. So he was something of a counterbalance or counterweight to Kelly Packer. Kelly Packer is bought and paid for, in my opinion. She's bought and paid for by the rhinos right here in town, in the county, and certainly by the lobbyists and the insurance interests in the state. But there was a very interesting article in the paper recently by Wayne Hoffman. Wayne Hoffman is the fellow that started the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Boy, you talk about a guy that the establishment hate here in Idaho. The establishment in Idaho hates Wayne Hoffman because he's the whistleblower. He's the guy that keeps an eye on the establishment, on the rhinos, on the lefto-pinkos in both parties, and he keeps an eye on the state's shenanigans with everything from controlling the forestry to being in businesses competing with private enterprise. And they don't like him. They dislike Wayne Hoffman, the establishment. Now, the real Republicans, true Republicans here in the state, and conservative constitutionalists, such as myself, if I may put myself forward, we like what he's doing. And my wife and I support him very, very modestly. We don't have a lot of money, but we support it because we like what he's doing. He's blowing the whistle. Well, Kelly Packer has lied and lied and lied and lied. She has been completely supportive of the insurance exchange, which, originally Otter said, no, we're not going to do it, and then he caved because he wanted the federal money in here. Kelly, of course, is bought and paid for by the insurance industry, and so she's their girl, and she's supporting them. Well, let me give you an idea of how she's supporting them. There was this article was in the Idaho State Journal. I think it was earlier than this. This says March 20th, which was Sunday. I think this was actually earlier, but this was run on the 20th. Let me share this with you. Representative Kelly Packer's recent unprovoked attack on the conservative Idaho Freedom Foundation shocked many. More disturbing, however, has been her decision to continue misleading her constituents about Idaho Freedom Foundation and her voting record. Remember last year I shared her voting record with you, and she was way down in the red. She was right there with the Democrats. In fact, she supported the Democrats on a few issues. So she is not a constitutionally centered or right-wing or whatever you want to call conservative. She is a rhino with a capital R as in rotten. Anyway, Packer's entitled to her opinions, but she owes it to the people in her district to be straight with the facts. Let's start with a recent message I delivered via phone to Packer's constituents. My message said, this is Wayne Hoffman, Packer voted to increase your taxes. Kelly Packer voted for corporate cronyism. She voted to regulate bake sales. Bake sales? Are you kidding? She even sponsored a bill to license sign language interpreters. Representative Kelly Packer voted to implement Obamacare in Idaho, and she says she'd do it again if she could. Now think about it. Regulating bake sales? You know, churches make money with bake sales. Girl Scouts make money with bake sales. She wants to regulate them. They're going to have to get a permit if she got her own way, which she didn't. Cooler heads prevailed. And then she wanted to make it where you had to have a special license in order to use sign language. Now, my number one granddaughter attending ISU is conversant in, I believe, in American Sign Language, and she plans to use it when she graduates because she wants to work with autistic children and with children who have other special needs, like deaf children. Can you imagine that she would have to have a license in order to talk to these children? Suppose, and the bill was so onerous, and I say was because it too has failed for now. It was so onerous that, technically speaking, a mother or father would have to have a license to speak with their own child using sign language. That's Kelly Packer. That's madness. It just makes no sense. On Facebook, Packer responded to my phone message. That's Idaho Freedom Foundation, Wayne Hoffman. She wrote, "Nothing in this 45-second report is accurate or factual. It's just his interpretation of what should and shouldn't be. Former President John Adams said, 'Facts are stubborn things.' And it's a stubborn and undeniable fact that Packer voted for all the things that my message highlighted. Let's review her Republican in name only rhino actions, as outlined in my phone message. Packer has voted to increase taxes for all Idahoans. In 2015, she joined with Democrats and moderate Republicans, which is usually another term for rhino, to support House Bill 312, which increased gas taxes and vehicle registration fees. She has voted for corporate cronyism. In 2014, she supported House Bill 546, the result of which is giving millions of tax dollars to politically connected big businesses at the expense of smaller entrepreneurs and established Idaho businesses, not to mention at the expense of everyday working people who paid those taxes. In 2015, she voted to regulate bake sales. Bake sales. Had House Bill 187, and I thought that was the perfect title for it, 187 is the penal code section in California for murder. Seemed like an appropriate title for this one. Had House Bill 187 passed, people would have had to register their home kitchens with state officials if they wanted to supply cakes and pies for events, which was very interesting because my wife used to supply pies for the Republican parties, the annual Christmas, the annual picnics, and the Reagan-Lincoln Day parties. She used to supply pies, which always brought a very nice price in the auctions because her pies are delicious. My wife would have had to register our kitchen and get a license to produce those pies for Kelly Packer's rhino buddies in that part of the Republican Party. But I digress. Packer was the lead sponsor of 2015's House Bill 152, which would have required sign language interpreters to get a government license in order to work in Idaho. Thankfully, Governor Butch Otter vetoed the measure. In 2013, Packer voted for the state insurance exchange, a major component of Obamacare. She has since voiced support for Medicaid expansion, another facet of Obamacare. She just loves that federal money. As concerns Medicaid expansion, Packer said she'd vote for it if given the opportunity. Again, if given the opportunity. Let the record show all Idaho Freedom Foundation has done is lay out these and other truths. Packer could simply have explained her positions. She could have been honest with her constituents, with all Idahoans, and instead she distorted, she denied, she created straw man arguments. She lied. Packer goes further. She wrongly attacks IFF with an assertion that we're breaking the law by lobbying, advocating, and educating on behalf of Idaho taxpayers. In brief, we're not. Why is Packer angry with the Idaho Freedom Foundation? She's upset because we monitor what lawmakers do, not just what they say. Packer wants her constituents to believe she's fighting against big government in Boise. Sorry, but she's not. Let's be frank. Believing something to be true is not the same as it being true. Packer's a vehicle for special interests who want higher taxes, more regulations, and special favors. The Idaho Freedom Foundation's policy research, watchdog work, and Freedom Index scorecard hurts Packer's personal narrative. In truth, she's just another big government rhino Republican who's counting on the good people of District 28 to be in the dark about her liberal voting record. And that was written by Wayne Hoffman, president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Pardon me, folks. As I think I mentioned at the top of the show, not quite out of the woods yet. I finished my penicillin regimen today, and we're still having some problems, so please bear with me. All right, now, there is good news in the air and on the way. Jason West, a local doctor of chiropractic, has thrown his hat in the ring to run against Kelly Packer. Now, why is that? Well, among other things, Kelly Packer has introduced legislation that if it were to go through, it would completely destroy Dr. West and his practice and many other chiropractors who also practice neuropathic medicine. And Dr. West is one of the primary practitioners in this area and in the state, for that matter, of neuropathic, I think I'm using the word properly, of chiropractic. He is a very successful business here in town, very successful, and she is basically trying to put him out of business because he had the temerity to go to Boise and speak to Kelly Packer and others about this law that they're trying to pass. And as being the people who are trying to pass it, if I understand correctly, is basically the medical board of the association here in the state of Idaho. They don't like chiropractors, they don't like neuropathic practitioners, and they want to regulate them basically out of business. And she's their girl. She's right there on board with it. And so she is, if she is successful, she would basically destroy Dr. West and many others who practice a very necessary part of physical and mental health in our area and in this state. So he was asked by a number of people to fight, and he finally said, you know what, he doesn't want to do it. He's a successful businessman. He really just wants to continue working and doing his job, but he felt that somebody had to stand up to her and her thug buddies, and so he is doing it. There's an interesting side light here, but well, I'll get to that in a moment. Now, Dr. West is going to have a campaign kickoff for his campaign at the Red Lion Inn, March 31st. So mark that on your calendar. If you're tired of seeing the big brother with the heavy fist in Boise or any place else beating up on the local businessmen, the entrepreneurs, the good guys, if you're tired of that, then please, I would suggest you go to this kickoff campaign. It's going to be at the Red Lion Inn, March 31st, from 6:30 p.m. till 9:30 p.m. The first 200 people at the event will receive a free tote bag filled with goodies. And if you've had enough, as I have and many others, I would say that you should consider seriously voting for Dr. Jason West for District 28 to get rid of Kelly Packer and her thug buddies. I'll be bringing you more information as I get it, but that's and you can see my little sign there. So periodically, while you're watching the show, just look down there. Dr. Jason West. I am going to be supporting him, and I hope that you will give him a listen. I listened to the entirety of his information, and it is chilling. I mean, it is truly chilling to hear what our own government is trying to do to this businessman, which would affect all doctors of chiropractic medicine and neuropaths in this state. Or naturopaths. I'm saying neuropaths. I guess it's naturopaths. All right. So, all right. To be continued. Going back to what I was saying earlier about Donald Trump, my wife got I hope I can make this funny for you. It was humorous for me. If you've watched Donald Trump and you've seen his dog and pony show, it's the same thing with his this and this and this and this. A lot of hand. It looks like he's trying to guide a ship into the harbor or something, and never quite sure what he's doing with his hands while he's busy calling people names. But he really never gives you anything to put your teeth into as to how he's going to do all these wonderful things. But he tells you every time, you're going to love it, it's beautiful, it's just wonderful, and I'm just so great, and everything is about him. And really, he hasn't given us anything, I mean anything of substance. Just a lot of hoopla and carnival huckster. Well, George Takei, George Takei, remember him? He was in the space exploration, Star Trek. Thank you. I've got a live studio audience, so I can get prompted here a little bit. Star Trek, and Takei was, I think, one of the communications officers or something. He was one of the officers there at the helm, and he, a funny guy. Anyway, he wrote this little thing. Let me share this with you, if I may. Donald Trump answers a question: what is 2 + 2? Now, this is supposed to be a quote from Donald Trump, but you can, if you've watched Trump doing his huckstering, you can see this coming out of his face. I have to say, a lot of people have been asking this question. No, really, a lot of people come up top me and ask, and they ask me. They say, what is 2 + 2? And I tell them, look, we know what 2 + 2 is. We have had almost 8 years of the worst kind of math you can imagine. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Addition and subtraction of the 1s, the 2s, and the 3s is terrible. It's just terrible. Look, if you want to know 2 + 2 is, do you want to know what 2 + 2 is? I'll tell you. First, the number 2. By the way, I love the number 2. You know what? It's probably more like the number 2, but with a lot of zeros behind it. A lot. If I'm being honest, I mean if I'm being honest. I like a lot of zeros, except for Marco Rubio. Now, he's a zero that I don't like, though I probably shouldn't say that. He's a nice guy, but he's like 1 0, 1 0, 1 0, 1 0, 1 0, and on like that. He's like a computer. You know what I mean? He's like a computer. I don't know. So we have all these numbers, and we can add them and subtract them and add them, times them even. Did you know that? Did you know that? We can times them or divide them. They won't tell us that. And I'll tell you, no one is better at the order of operations than me. You wouldn't believe it. So we're going to be the best on 2 + 2, believe me. That's Donald Trump on what is 2 + 2. George Takei. He's a funny guy, and I wish he had done that shtick because I think it would have been much funnier. But I hope you got the humor out of it that I did. Well, I've got a brief a video I'd like you to see, and it's in. Well, you're going to see why it's important. It's only 6.5 minutes, but I hope you'll take the time to watch this and think carefully. If you think it can't happen here, believe me, my friend, it can happen here. Are we ready to go on that, Josh? Please watch this.
If Greece has carried more than its share of the burden, so too has Sweden. A nation with less than half the population of Australia took in 165,000 refugees last year alone and is starting to buckle under the pressure.
This is a country that's barely coping. Only 6 months ago, Sweden was proudly proclaiming itself the humanitarian superpower of the world. Now it's closing its borders to refugees without identity papers. And its neighbours are being even tougher. Denmark is stripping asylum seekers of valuables to help pay for their upkeep, confiscating cash and jewellery, basically everything except wedding rings. The message couldn't be clearer. Please, no more refugees.
Is it refugee overload?
Yes, it's a refugee overload. That's a good word.
Just too many people?
Too many people, and too many people of the wrong kind.
Like many of his countrymen, Jan Hunnesson is calling time. This one-time school teacher and more recently political activist says Sweden is on the brink of an economic and cultural disaster.
The problem with a generous welfare state like Sweden is that we're very, very soft.
And this is an example, he says, of Sweden's too trusting acceptance of young refugees, men posing as boys to claim special treatment.
This is an athlete, and he's called Sweden's fastest 14-year-old.
So he is said to be a 14-year-old?
Yes. It's a bit hilarious, but if you're 18 and above, you don't get the benefits that you get if you're under 18, and you can't be thrown out with the same kind of laws and force.
Will the generosity stop?
Well, if you call it that generosity to ruin your own country, yes, it has to stop, but I think we're still generous.
Have you seen your fellow refugee?
Yeah.
Let this side down.
Of course, you always have, like, really bad refugees. You know, people who just, you know, take everything for free, who cannot wait, you know, to take their chance.
It's frustrating.
It is frustrating, but, you know, you got to keep strong. You got to do it for yourself and for your family, and I hope I'll be able to prove something, actually.
For all its generosity, Sweden is now grappling with communities of disaffected migrants who can't find jobs and have few prospects. The country's image was shattered 3 years ago when riots broke out in the Stockholm suburb of Husby. There are now 55 declared no-go zones in Sweden where police have to escort ambulances to ensure their safety. And as we found out, the temperature is similar in the suburb of Rinkeby, home to mostly Somali migrants. Within minutes of us arriving, a group of young men make it clear we're not wanted and deliberately run down our cameraman.
Whoops! Nej men vad fan!
Hey, 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 hey.
Gå on! What happened?
You all right?
Your leg?
You went out my foot.
Are you all right? It's a little more hostile than I had anticipated.
Okay, welcome to Rinkeby. It's also called Little Mogadishu.
And is that what you're worried about for the future of Sweden? That clash, this clash?
Yes,
we
of
saw?
course. Now, one of your film crew members was run over by a car here, and it took us 1.5 minutes. So
Yes, we're literally just out of the car and aggression.
they didn't have any reason to do that, did they?
No, well, definitely not.
We call the police.
To be honest, we hadn't anticipated such intense aggression. Our cameraman was literally...
And even they fear their presence will be provocative.
I think it's better if you go in without us, because I think it would be...
very aggressive.
Yeah, if
Okay.
we're young. So we will stay here, and if it is...
That's fine.
You watch us.
Perfect.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Majority here are Muslims from East Africa, and they don't assimilate well into the Swedish culture and society, and they're unemployed, and they're poor. So you add all these factors together, and their youth are feeling marginalized, and don't speak Swedish very well, so they don't get jobs or get into the Swedish youth culture either.
But not everyone is hostile.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my cousin lives in Melbourne.
Many locals are polite and friendly
Take care.
and happy to talk.
It's good.
Yeah.
I'm very happy.
But what happened next changed everything. The police leave, and as we prepare to go, young men masking their faces arrive.
Good, we're doing good.
You're doing good?
Yeah.
Okay, very
Always.
good.
Take it easy.
Okay, you too.
And attack.
Go! Mate! Go! Don't you touch me! Okay, we're gonna drink.
Excuse me. Please, please.
Get out of here.
No, we are leaving, but you don't need to hurt us. There's no need to be unkind. Hey,
Can't feel.
don't do
it.
The gang's attention turns when a local intervenes and drives his mobility scooter into the most violent attacker.
Move. We've been individually attacked. Soundman has been punched, the producer's been punched, you've been run over, the cameraman. We've all been assaulted and insulted. It's best we leave.
For refugees like Marwan, the hostility and the changing mood in his adopted country make him uneasy about his future. There is a part of you that's fearful that you'll be turned back.
Yeah, of course. You always have doubts. We're human beings. We always have doubts.
Welcome back. I'm busy chatting with my audience and I almost missed the light there. Well, listen, last week, before I get to that, I've got to share this with you. This was from Thursday, March the 10th, the newspaper, and I just kept it because, remember I said that the paper just seems to get worse and worse and worse. It makes you wonder, what are they thinking down there? Here we go. You remember the dog that got hit by a car, maybe broke his leg and ran off, and his owner was looking for him, and it was kind of a heart-wrenching thing. I mean, if you've had a dog or a cat and you lose them, especially in circumstances like this, we're all sympathetic to that. And then about 2 weeks later, the dog is reunited with a family. Well, now here's the way the local newspaper sees the world, all right? Above the fold, front page, lead article, missing dog reunites with family after car crash. All right, not exactly above the fold front page stuff to me, but maybe it is to them. At the bottom of the paper, below the fold in the bottom, Southeast Idaho counties sold on Ted Cruz. Below the fold. This is the political season, and it's a big deal what's going on in our state. And they think that the dog reunited with the family is the most important thing happening in the community. I hold little or no hope for this paper. All right. Last week, you may recall, I shared with you some of the life of Muhammad, because remember, without Muhammad, there is no Islam. Muhammad is the self-proclaimed prophet of Allah. He declared himself to be the voice of Allah, the God of Islam. And even as I shared with you, he even went so far as to say, whatever I say is as if Allah says it to you. And then he says that Allah says this. So he wraps it up in a nice little bow that if you don't listen to him, then you are not obeying Allah, and eventually you have to die. Now it's very interesting. The Qur'an, and I've got two different versions of it here. The Qur'an says 91 times that his words and actions are considered to be the divine pattern for humanity. Remember, we're talking about Muhammad. Muhammad who married Aisha when she was age six, but good man that he was, waited until she was 9 to consummate that. What a guy. The same Muhammad who had, I think, 9 official wives. We don't remember how many real wives, other wives he had. The same Muhammad who kept slaves. His right hand possesses them, and he could use them for whatever he wanted. He used them for trade, barter, and sex. The same Muhammad who was a murderer many times over, who one day murdered somewhere between 600 and 900. The figure usually used as 800. The Muhammad who sat there with Aisha, his child bride, and watched as his men beheaded 800 Jews because they had the temerity to say that Allah was not the true God. And that's how he makes sure well, you'll never say that again. This is the same Muhammad who was attacking caravans and murdering people and stealing their property. This is the guidepost. This is the golden rule. This is the benchmark by which all Muslims are to measure themselves. Now think about that. A murderer, a pedophile, a thief, a slave trader, a slave holder, a rapist. I can't even think. I mean, what else is left? That is the yardstick. That is the benchmark for all good Muslims to exemplify. You and I, as either Jews or Christians, have a different take on it. As Christians, we are not required to emulate Jesus, but we are taught that that's probably not a bad thing to do, because Jesus' message was one of redemption and peace and love and caring for your fellow man. Not once did he say kill anybody. Not once did he defile anybody sexually or otherwise. Not once did he steal anything. He never owned slaves. He never murdered in the name of the living God. Absolute antithesis. Now, why is this important? Because without Muhammad, there is no Allah, and without Allah, there is no Islam. Now remember, I shared with you that Allah is not a made-up God as such. Allah was one of a pantheon of gods before he was raised to the position of number one God by Muhammad. Allah was known before Islam came into being, but he was one of just many minor gods. The pantheists who worshipped many gods, and they had a god for just about everything from nosebleed to bad crops. Allah was just one of them. He is also known as the moon god, and that's a different story altogether. It wasn't until Muhammad declared himself to be the personal messenger of Allah and elevated Allah to being the God that he was of any importance. So now many people are confused about what Islam is. People think that the Qur'an is Islam. Well, actually it's not. The Qur'an is only 14% of Islam. It is the religious anchor, but it's only a part of Islam. The rest of it is the Hadith. Now the Hadith is a collection of stories, basically stories about Muhammad as spoken by other people and recorded 200 years after the fact. And basically, if you're reading the Hadiths, it's something like this. I was talking to my friend John, who heard it from Calvin, that Fred said thus. It isn't even first person. It's hearsay. It's stories. It's little vignettes that are made up, and those are the Hadith. This is one of the three parts of Islam. This is second only to the Quran, the Hadiths. And these are stories reported to be or reputed to be things about Muhammad. The most common and most widely accepted is the Hadith of Bukhari. And I have volumes 1 through 4 of the Hadith of Bukhari. One part of Islam. The other part of Islam is the Sharia. Sharia is the law of Islam. And it's important for Westerners to understand because Sharia bears no resemblance to our Western theories of democracy or republicanism or constitutional. It is antithetical to anything that we in the West would study. The most widely used book or compilation of books for that is The Reliance of the Traveler, with 2 L's, and that's correct the way it is, a classic manual of Islamic sacred law. These three things, the Sharia, the Reliance of the Traveler, the Hadith, and the Quran make up what we call Islam, well, what they call Islam. Much different from our Western way of looking at the world. Much different because there is very definitely in our Western world a separation of church and state, in that the state cannot dictate a religion, the state cannot support a religion, the state is supposed to not even interfere with a religion. However, our Western religions do not encompass all the laws. They are not the law of the land. They are a personal relationship between us and our God. All right, let me just, I want to share with you something that might shed some new light on this. We don't have a lot of time, so we're probably not going to get as far as I would like to. But this is from a book. It's called Sharia Law for Non-Muslims. It's more like, it's a booklet, not a book, but a booklet by a fellow named Bill Warner, Center for the Study of Political Islam. And Bill Warner has melted this down into layman terms that make it a little more easily understood, because people are confused about Islam and Sharia, and most people don't even know about the Hadiths and the importance of the Hadith. So let me share. I'm just going to read this verbatim, so bear with me. He wrote it better than I could speak it extemporaneously. Sharia in Europe today, and what you just saw was Sweden, for instance. Europe is witnessing a rise in Islamic supremacism, demands for Sharia, and violent intimidation. Pardon me. Laws passed by European states and resolutions in universities and other organizations have stifled free speech. While limiting criticism of Islam, authorities have failed to prevent preachers inciting violence against women and Jews, and have tolerated public calls for the murder of those who insult Islam. When was the last time you murdered somebody or called for murder if somebody insulted Jesus or Moses? The European Union has entertained the notion of laws to crack down on intolerance, including Islamophobia. Sharia principles are enforced either through Sharia tribunals in mainstream courts or through violent intimidation. Pardon me. Misogynistic de facto parallel systems are common. Honor violence and homophobia widespread, and the harassment of Jews has intensified. Sharia tribunals operate in the United Kingdom run by Islamists who openly defend a man's right to use violence against his wife. In the United Kingdom and Denmark, Sharia-controlled zones have been declared, and in Germany, Sharia patrols roam city streets attempting to impose Sharia norms, particularly targeting women and alcohol drinkers. A French magazine was firebombed for printing Muhammad cartoons, and Austria has seen prosecutions for negative views of Islam and its prophet. A Dutch filmmaker was murdered for criticizing Islam's treatment of women, and critical Dutch politicians face death threats. Homophobic violence has increased in the Netherlands, with Muslim youth overwhelmingly implicated. Violence against women and Jews has risen in Scandinavia, with many Jews leaving the region. The establishment's response shows more concern with preventing discussion of these facts than in confronting them. Doesn't that sound familiar? Here are current and historical events in America that are driven by Sharia law. On September 11, 2001, jihadists attacked and destroyed the World Trade Center in New York. This atrocity was in compliance to the doctrine of jihad found in the Sharia law. The attack was a political action motivated by a religious mandate for endless jihad. Jihad is, in the Muslim world, jihad is a constant state. It never stops. Textbooks in America must be approved by Islamic councils. This is in accordance with Sharia law. American employers and schools are met with demands for time and space to do Islamic prayer. These demands are based on Sharia law. Now, you're not allowed to do Christian prayer, but you can do Islamic prayer. Okay? The American banking system is becoming Islamicized with Sharia financing. The banking system is becoming Sharia compliant in financial law, but is ignorant about the totality of Sharia law. Universities are asked to provide sexually segregated swimming pools and other athletic facilities for Muslim women. Hospitals are being sued for not providing Sharia-compliant treatment. College courses at the college level do not use critical thinking regarding the history and doctrine of Islam. Under Sharia, nothing about Islam may be criticized. Muslim charities give money to jihadists, Islamic terrorists, as per Sharia law. American prisons are a stronghold of Islamic proselytizing. Workplaces are being made Islamic worship sites through special rooms and time off to pray. This is in accordance to Sharia law. Islamic refugees bring all of their wives for welfare and medical treatment to America. American authorities will not act even when presented with evidence. Polygamy is included in the Sharia. Wars were fought in Iraq and Afghanistan to implement constitutions whose first article is the supremacy of Sharia law. Islamic scholars claim, remember this is their scholars, Islamic law is perfect, universal, and eternal. The laws of the United States are temporary, limited, and will pass away. It is the duty of every Muslim to obey the laws of Allah, the Sharia, and the Sharia. U.S. laws are man-made, while Sharia law is sacred and comes from the only legitimate God, Allah. Sharia is based on the principles found in the Qur'an and other Islamic religious political texts. There are no common principles between American law and Sharia. Under Sharia, there is no freedom of religion. There is no freedom of speech. There is no freedom of thought. There is no freedom of artistic expression. There is no freedom of the press. There is no equality of peoples. A non-Muslim, a kafir, is never equal to a Muslim. There is no equal protection under Sharia for different classes of people. Justice is dualistic, with one set of laws for Muslim males and different laws for women and non-Muslims. There are no equal rights for women. Women can be beaten. A non-Muslim cannot bear arms. There is no democracy, since democracy means that a non-Muslim is equal to a Muslim. Our Constitution is a man-made document of ignorance, jahiliya that must submit to Sharia. Non-Muslims are dhimmis, third-class citizens, and that's only if they're allowed to pay the jizya, the tax. They can be just as easily killed and never become a dhimmi. All governments must be ruled by Sharia. Remember, this is what the Sharia principles tell all good practicing Muslims. Unlike common law, Sharia is not interpreted, nor can it be changed. There is no golden rule. There are 3 points of view relative to Islam. The point of view depends upon how you think about Muhammad. If you believe Muhammad is the prophet of Allah, then you are a believer. If you don't, you are a non-believer. The third viewpoint is that of an apologist for Islam. Apologists do not believe that Muhammad was a prophet, but they are tolerant about Islam without any actual knowledge of Islam. Here's an example of the 3 points of view. In Medina, Muhammad sat all day long beside his 12-year-old wife while they watched as the heads of 800 Jews were removed by sword. And this is from the Life of Muhammad, a well-documented treatise. Their heads were cut off because they had said that Muhammad was not the prophet of Allah. Now remember, Allah is the self-proclaimed prophet of Allah. Muslims view these deaths as necessary because denying Muhammad's prophethood was and remains an offense against Islam. They were beheaded because it is sanctioned by Allah, according to Muhammad. Non-believers look at this event as proof of the jihadic violence of Islam and as an act of evil. Apologists say that this was an historic event, that all cultures have violence in their past and no judgment should be passed. They have never actually read any of Islam's foundational texts, but speak authoritatively about Islam. According to the different points of view, killing the 800 Jews was a tragedy, a perfect sacred act, another historical event. We have done worse. There is no right view of Islam since the views cannot be reconciled. Sharia law is Islamic law. Sharia is the basis for every demand that Muslims make on our society. When schools are asked to give up room for Islamic prayer, that is asking us to implement Islamic law. When a Muslim wears a headscarf, that is in obedience to Sharia law. When our newspapers would not publish the Danish Muhammad cartoons, our newspapers were submitting to the demands of Sharia law. When demands are made for our hospitals to treat Muslim women in special ways, that is Sharia. When our textbooks have to be vetted by Muslim organizations before they are used in our schools, that is in accordance with Sharia. The attack on the World Trade Center was perpetrated in adherence to the rules of war, jihad, found in Sharia law. Sharia law is the basis for the religious, political, and cultural life of all Muslims. Sharia law is being implemented more and more in America, and yet there is no knowledge about what Sharia actually is, since public, private, or religious schools do not teach it. The easiest way to learn about Islam is through Sharia law. Through learning about Sharia, you are introduced to the Qur'an and Muhammad in a practical matter. When you know Sharia, Islam makes sense. Most people believe that Islam is complicated or even impossible to understand. But when you understand its principles, Islam is very, very logical. It is based on different views of humanity, logic, knowledge, and ethics. Once you understand the principles and logic, you're not only going to explain what and why something is happening, but you'll be able to predict the next step in the process. Now, why am I sharing this with you in such detail? Well, for a number of reasons. There is a bill before the House right now here in Idaho that is meant to protect our Constitution and our local laws from Sharia, because the Muslims are making a push to have Sharia as part of their right in our constitutional republic. Very interesting, there was a thing in the paper, let's see if I can find this. Yeah, local Muslims cautious about new Idaho bill. And the new Idaho bill would basically say that you're not allowed to practice Sharia in place of state or constitutional law. Local Muslims don't like it. The Rahim brothers, 2 medical doctors here in town, both men of good repute who do a lot of good works, you know, giving money, and they've put together their own foundation where they give out a medal and they give out give out awards and all that. They're highly thought of, but they are devout Muslims, and they have spoken out. In fact, there's a photograph here of listening to, I think it was one of the doctors, Rahim, speaking at the local mosque. A friend of mine just came back to Pocatello after a 3-year absence and was astonished to see that we have a mosque here. And I had to explain to him that that's not all we have here. We also have somewhere between 1,200 and 2,000 Muslims in the university, and we're getting more and more of them in the community. And in a town that's only not quite 50,000, 2,000 is a huge complement of one religion whose religious beliefs require them to live by Sharia. Remember, Islam is not like being a Methodist or a Mormon or a Jew. There is no similarity because the Qur'an is only the anchor for their whole way of life. And their whole way of life is their religion, and their religion is their whole way of life. We have nothing like that here in the Western world. And so when you hear, like Trump said, we should stop bringing Muslims into the country, well, that was a pretty broad statement, but there is a very basic truth to that. Muslims coming into this country who continue to be Muslims, who subscribe to the Quran as being the word of Allah, who subscribe to Muhammad as being the messenger of Allah, who subscribe to the hadiths as being supportive truth as to what Muhammad is and what he said, and who subscribe to the Sharia as being their law, everything they're doing as a package is antithetical to our constitutional republic. They have no business here. But it makes it sound like you are picking on their religion when he said, for instance, no more Muslims. What he's saying, he probably doesn't even know himself what he was saying, but what he's saying is very important, because Muslims, their whole end game through jihad is to conquer the world for Allah, and Muhammad being the messenger, and you need to die if you don't submit. Well, God bless you. We're almost out of time, so I'm going to say thank you so much for watching. Sorry I got into my coughing jag here, but hopefully we'll be better next week. In the meantime, remember to pray for our nation, pray for Israel, love your family. Remember that Islam is a horror, that it has no place in this nation, and that we need to contact our state representatives and support those who are trying to protect us against Sharia. God bless you. Good night.